This is Doug Fletcher, and you're listening to What's the Hazard? It is Friday, September 23rd. I'm sitting here with my friend and colleague, Danni Arroyo of WorkSafe Consulting, and we have a guest with us today coming to us from Central New York, which is very exciting. Wow, we're kind of a regional program, and so to have a guest come in from Central New York is exciting, and we welcome you. My guest is Liz Kiggins. Impact Ergonomics, is that the name of your company, Liz?
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome. And Danni, thanks for being here. One of the greatest joys I get from this program, I've been doing this for almost 3 years now, and truly one of the greatest joys that I get is meeting new people. I love networking with other professionals, other occupational safety, what am I trying to say? Occupational safety and health specialists. You guys are such an interesting niche that you are not the typical safety and health specialist, as we will discuss, but introducing new businesses to the audience, I think, is fantastic, and discussing aspects of our profession that I have very little experience with is also really interesting to me. So I am looking forward to this. Again, your company is Impact Ergonomics, and you are a physical therapist.
Yes, I'm a physical therapist.
That's awesome.
Certified ergonomics specialist like Danni as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing this. I got into this niche 2009, and then I started on my own in 2013.
Oh, very good. And so, well, that's a good run. So you've had your own business for almost 10 years now, or is?
Yeah, I don't really count the first 3 years because it was it was hard to break into a little bit.
Definitely. I think we both experienced that. Absolutely. Those first years are incredibly challenging and exhilarating at the same time, and exciting, and all sorts of, uncertain.
It's a roller coaster.
It is a really interesting roller coaster, but one that I know that we have talked. I would never go back. I could never go back to being an employee at this point. I would never give it up. Well, interestingly, I have been to both occupational therapists and physical therapists, just personally. So I know a little bit about the distinction between the two. There's probably very little distinction from an occupational health application, but tell me about, how you got into the occupational side of the practice, and then what kind of services you offer, what you do for your clients.
Am I going first, or is Danni?
Yeah, go ahead. No, Danni's already done this.
Yeah,
okay.
I've done this many times.
Yeah, you tell us.
Oh, okay. So, how did I get into this? Was that your question?
Yeah, why did you go into occupational setting?
I was in outpatient orthopedics and treating patients, and I actually transitioned into managing, and I was even possibly thinking about opening my own orthopedic private practice. And you kind of come to that crossroads of kind of like what you're saying, do you want to be, I wanted to have my own autonomy. I definitely wanted to be my own boss, so to speak. But I really found that as I was working with patients, I kept telling them the same things over and over again about how they could have prevented this problem in the first place. And I just had this natural draw to the workplace and what they do at work. And there were two therapists in my area that were doing this work. And I kind of decided I was going to reach out to them. And that's how I broke into it. I started as their employee. And I just left the outpatient. Other things were happening as well. And I was looking at insurance as well. And the constant struggle with getting paid, and everything was being whittled down. And then it was almost like you were being dictated what to do with your patients based on what insurance they had. So I just kind of jumped off, and I was underemployed for a while because the people that I started working with, they didn't really have, they were gracious to take me in, but they didn't really have enough work for me to do at the time. And then that relationship built, and then they actually, they moved away, and I that's when I started my own, because I just started networking with safety people and learning about that whole job. I didn't even know about safety professionals, when I started out as a PT, but when I decided I wanted to do more and more of this, just started networking and just took the leap. And then I got I was asked to speak at a conference, a Syracuse healthy, I think it was like just for the overall healthy well-being. That's when it started coming up just in the beginning with work with the industrial settings, like having wellness coaching and, investing in that type of thing. Interestingly, on a side note, sorry, I remember telling someone about what I do, and she was like, oh, that's probably the first thing they're going to cut, isn't it? And
Right.
they just did, like, it's so new back then. People didn't understand, like, well, it's actually going to save the company a lot of money. So fast forward, that just segued into my first client. And then, safety professionals talk to each other. And if they like you, they will recommend people. And that's how I got my other business, was all through word of mouth, honestly. And my winning personality, I think, too, helps.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
But and one of the safety EHS guys said to me, he goes, you prevented one injury. When you prevent one injury, which you have already, he goes, this pays for itself, and then everything else is extra. So that's a great way to look at it.
It should be on your website.
Yeah, I know, it really should.
And so let me so talk about the services that you provide, and what when we talk about occupational therapy or physical therapy in a workplace setting, I think people have a tendency to think of it as almost clinical, as it's reactive. We are treating injuries or something, or treating soreness and things that our employees are experiencing, but it's a lot more than that, and it tends to lean more toward the preventative side, if I'm not mistaken.
It's so hard. Don't you think, Danny, for especially people that aren't in the workforce? When you're working with the workers, they get it, but when you're telling someone about it, they just automatically go to that clinical, model.
It's very unusual. The way that you and I practice is very unusual. That's something Liz and I talk on a regular basis. We actually have like a standing monthly call.
Nice.
And we always just joke about, it's just like the Wild West.
It is.
And she and I, we're both very preventative, but we even practice very differently too. But it all is preventative.
But the end game is the same.
Right.
We're there to look at people, and we're both looking at how people move and how they stand in postures and how they interact with their workstation, and give them coaching and advice in terms of how to make it more efficient and better for their bodies, as well as the ergonomic design of things. But that's where we're unique. I remember looking at a situation at a company where a worker was extended on their back underneath a product that they were overhand use. And the ergonomist was, the EHS guy was looking in terms of, they were lifting something up. And so he was looking at it in terms of what equipment they could provide to keep him in that position. And all this person was doing is they were actually like lifting a product up that was heavy, but they were sizing it. And I was like, well, why don't we just make that lighter? So it's not as much of a magnitude of force, and because they need to do that position, but they don't have to do it for so long. And so it's just like our different ways of looking at a situation can be different. I think they focus so much on the engineering fix in terms of like bringing new equipment in, and I know maybe that wasn't the best example, because I do look at things more from a postural point, but I was thinking muscle force and muscle usage in that example.
But is that the primary focus of your work, is then the evaluation of these work activities and looking for interventions, try to reduce some of those risk factors? So I'm going to refer to that as ergonomics, and I am by no means an ergonomist. I know just a little bit about it, but is that what people are typically retaining you for?
That's one piece. They're really looking at me to teach people how to not twist their torso when they're turning 90 degrees, pick up their feet a little bit, coaching them, kind of like how a coach is on. I mean, Danni, we talked about this analogy of the sports, but it is similar because that's their work, their task, and how they move their bodies. If someone's holding something with two hands, and they're trying to maybe screw in a connector with their dominant hand. And, we're seeing it as, well, geez, that static load on the other hand is getting fatigued. And do we really need to, they need to either do more micro breaks, or maybe we need to bring a fixture in so they don't have to do that static load. So it's just, so that's the pure preventative, primary prevention. Then there's that early kind of like, I don't want to say early intervention. It's when people start to have aches and pains. Things start, and I don't like to use the word pain from OSHA, but discomfort, we'll say, or even numbness and tingling, non-specific presentations of micro stress in the body.
I love that. Yeah, exactly.
Then we'll coach them into like, okay, what is causing that? Is it something you're doing at home? Because we can't, neglect the home stuff as well. Or is it something at work, that task? Is there something in their history? That's where kind of like our medical background can come out, and we can kind of weed out like maybe some of the risk factors that they are employing. And usually it's something they're doing to themselves. Intrinsically, it's not so much the work. You could have the best ergonomic work setup. Like look at an ergonomic chair. Like Danni and I go in, people have these ergonomic chairs, adjustable, $2,000 chairs, and they sit in it all crunched in, and they're like, I don't know, my neck, I got a headache. And
exactly.
Like, well, let's talk about posture.
Right. You said something really interesting a moment ago. You were talking about the EHS person at the company where you were doing your consultation, looking at something with a specific perspective, which I know that I do, having been doing this work for a long time. You develop a perspective, whether you're aware of it or not, and to bring a professional in who has the skills and training that the two of you do, but from a different angle, to look at things differently. I'm always, how can I engineer this to make this better? But I rarely ask the question, do we actually need to do this in the first place? That's not usually the question that I'm asking, and oftentimes I think that maybe that is the first question that should be asked. Maybe we don't need to do this particular activity. We certainly don't need to do it the way that we've done it for 40 years, and now we're, kind of married to that activity. So I love the idea of having a different perspective, even professionally a different perspective. I think there's a great value in that. So
yeah, we're your eyes and ears too. I mean, Danni, please chime in. Okay, this is like, I feel like I'm talking way too much here.
It's a job interview, actually. I don't know if he told you that.
I mean, I ask a lot, like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing it this way?
Yes.
And you always have to preface that with, you're not trying to find anything wrong. You literally just need to know why, because you oftentimes find with anything, like you said, if it's been done for 40 years, the answer is that's how we do it.
How we've always done it, right?
Yeah.
And it might be super inefficient and causing lots of injuries, but that's the way it's always been done. So
exactly. Yeah. And so
I like to compare between shifts. Like I look at a job task someone's having a problem with, or, maybe it's a new process, and I'll look at different people, different shifts, and how they approach it. And I kind of find like a best practice that way. And then I try to teach that to everybody, because sometimes someone, kind of like with Danni, is saying, they just are used to doing something a certain way. And then you get somebody maybe fresh to that area or who's open to change. And you kind of say, well, if we could do it this way, how does that feel to you? We talk about in terms of their body and how does it feel comfort. And I'm looking at too, their posture and angles and things like that. And then, so that, like what you're saying, Doug, like you don't always look at it from like, what kind of equipment can we bring in to make this better? A lot of times it's just their habit. What can we do to change their habit to make it more efficient, leaner? Because lean is ergonomic, but lean also applies to our body use. If we don't have to keep reaching 90 degrees and above overhead, and we can keep our shoulders at her side, that is so much better for our body, and it's a leaner movement too.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Well, you always want to try to engineer out whatever you can, but oftentimes that's just not realistic. Whether you actually can't engineer it out, or it's just too expensive to do it.
Right.
So you have to turn to the training and trying to change people's movement patterns and habits, which is very difficult and always takes a lot of time.
It is. And so before I forget, and again, this is something that is I'm notorious for. I'll have a thought as you're talking, and then I'll lose it. And I'm like, what the hell was that? And I don't, so. But one of the things that I think is interesting is in the industrial world, we see oftentimes these job rotation approaches. I'm just going to move my people around, and so the guy that screws the widget together here does that for a few hours. And I think if I just move him around or her around, I've addressed the ergonomic concerns, and I'm good. And then people like you tell me, Doug, that's pretty stupid, man. So can you talk a little bit about job rotation? And I know people are doing that in good faith. They think they're making an improvement, or they're actually, doing something good. But there are some pitfalls to job rotation that aren't always considered.
Right. Well, you're talking like changing them from job to job, and we're going to look at what muscles are they using. Are they gripping, pinching, and then they're going from more gripping, pinching to the next job? So they're using the same muscles, and then like the cycle of that muscle contraction, is it highly repetitive? Is the magnitude, maybe the magnitude is less, but it's the same muscle usage. So I think that's where rotation isn't always the answer. Maybe they're going from bending forward, but they're still doing more bending in the next job. It's just a static bend. Danni, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so Liz and I also work in a lot of very different sort of facilities. So like I do work with a lot of job rotation, and oftentimes I'll go into a facility and the shift supervisors or the floor manager has set up a rotation, I think kind of what you're talking about, because they were told to. And inevitably it's not really helping because, so for instance, let's say it's a fine motor job where they're going like this constantly, and then they rotate through 3 or 4 jobs, and they go from this to this, and then back to this, and then this, and that's really not a job rotation. Right. So what you're looking for with job rotation is the specific areas of the body. So we'll say like hand, elbow, shoulder, back, lower extremities, neck. So if something is high risk for one area, you want to move them to a low risk area for that body part, or the shoulders or neck or whatever. And that's what's usually missing from those sorts of job rotations. If you're just doing a random job rotation, like down a line where they're doing very similar things.
Just go from A to B to C to D and then come back to A and go through that process
it's all
again.
High risk for like the shoulders or the neck or whatever. That's not really the purpose of the job rotation.
And may not be providing any benefit necessarily. It might even be exacerbating it perhaps if you're not careful about how you do that. But I do think
oftentimes can exacerbate it.
I love talking about misconceptions and the misconceptions of the work that you do, or ergonomics in general. And so one of the misconceptions, and I think one of the reasons oftentimes that companies might be reluctant to bring in a professional like you guys would be they have this vision that it's just going to be, I'm going to have to redo my entire line, and it's going to be extremely expensive. And in my limited experience, some of these changes aren't necessarily all that expensive. It's just an awareness and coaching, as you said, that maybe they're not even aware that the things they're doing are risk factors that can be modified. Is that what your experience, or is everything really expensive?
I hear what you're saying. I haven't come across that fear as much as the fear of we're going to have someone come in and everyone's going to be reporting injuries because she's telling them that she wants to know about those early non-specific signs. And that's going to turn into recordables. And that's actually not true because because when you address something very early on in that micro stress phase, where it's not a specific sign or symptom, where it's just your body's telling you that it doesn't like what's happening, that's when things can be reversed, and then that ultimately leads to less musculoskeletal disorders down the road. So I think that misconception is usually the fear. At least I've encountered that. Danny, I don't know if you have the same, versus like equipment. I try to be very aware of a budget. Yeah, it'd be great. It's easy to go in and say, yeah, we need to have this all automated and, spend gobs of money, but that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to coach and help their employees work better in the environment that they are. Now, if there's glaring ergonomic things that need to be engineered out, then I will definitely present those. But that's where I'm working with you, the professional, the safety professional, within that, whatever the limits are. Unfortunately, the budget for safety is usually not the best budget. But we can be creative too in that way. Even if we just look at like an aspect of a job and just change one piece of that, the vertical travel, the horizontal distance, maybe the rate or something that could change just to alter and make that person feel better and less risk.
Mm-hmm. I think that fear of increased cost, I just think you could address it from the get-go. Whoever's bringing you in, ask about their budget. Mm-hmm. They might not even know what the budget is. It's very possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if we're talking about like the actual ergonomic reports, so when you assess the job and write a formal report, I think Liz and I both do it similar, where we give several suggestions at the end. And I always make sure to do like very basic ones that are essentially no cost, pretty much like training.
Right up front,
Yep. And then all the way down to, everything that I can think where, something might be a big purchase that would be something that they'd need to work into like a future budget to purchase if it was like a large piece of equipment or something like that, but not something that you would necessarily expect that they would implement immediately.
Right. And again, I'm just responding to what you guys have said, but the concern about record keeping has always been an interesting concern. As an OSHA record keeping guy, that was an agreement between OSHA and the National Association of Manufacturers back in 2002 when the new record-keeping standard was promulgated. They agreed that early intervention, everybody was interested in early intervention, but under the old OSHA record-keeping system, early intervention oftentimes meant a recorded incident because of some type of restriction or medical treatment of some sort, whatever that might be. And so the agreement allowed for just what you said, that we are promoting early intervention, and by doing so, when you are just in that early discomfort phase, when you can seek out help from a professional, you can address, those discomforts early and try to prevent that exacerbation. Everybody wants that, and particularly the therapy world has been very helpful in doing that. And the companies that I know that utilize services like yours always benefit from it. I've never seen anybody say this was a bad idea. They all say, why didn't we do this sooner? Or why haven't we been doing this? And it actually keeps a lot of stuff off your log that might normally otherwise find its way on there.
For sure. And plus we're outside the company. People are more willing to share with us and that whole psychosocial issue. We're not like the occupational office on site, like where they go in and, sometimes people get sort of like this punitive interaction with the employer. And then that just sets a whole cascade of anxiety, and everyone's cortisol levels are increasing, and then the whole healing process delays. So we try to avoid that.
Wow. I love that conversation. Let's have that conversation. I'm a big cortisol guy, so obviously. But I know this is a sidetrack, but I'm interested. I don't care what anybody else thinks. Let's talk about rice. I mean, are you proponents of
talk about rice?
Are you proponents of ice?
No.
Let's talk about that.
So let me give you some background. I don't know, maybe you already know this. Like Dr. Gabe is the surgeon or whatever. Somebody ripped their arm off in a train. They froze the arm, and it was the first orthopedic surgeon to reattach it successfully. And so everyone focused on the ice that preserved the frozen arm. And so that segued into ice is great, ice is great, ice is great. And then this marketing doctor was like rice, rest, ice, compression, elevation.
Yeah.
And incidentally, that was in the 1960s. So if you think about the science in the 1960s to now, it has changed drastically. And he actually recounted that whole okay, rice is really not valid anymore. I think in 2002 or something.
Yeah, he wrote a book about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know what ice is great for? You have someone, they hurt, it's like, here, put an ice pack on it. It will feel better, kind of like that reassure.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of healing, it impedes the blood flow. And then you add to that, not moving it, resting it. And then so you get the whole lymphatic system just sort of shutting down because you're not, moving any of that accumulated waste through your lymphatics. And that's where swelling occurs. So I'm not a proponent of ice. Not that I don't say, I don't deny it, but I will contrast. I will recommend contrast it with heat, or I just don't really bring it up if it's not something that I feel necessary. And I think OSHA this is like their standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rice.
Well, yes, of course. And OSHA's probably 40 years behind current medical tech, and they're not, but I just find that subject interesting as a former athlete. Let's put this into context chronologically, but I was always, we used to stick our bucket, when you would sprain your ankle, you stuck your foot into a bucket full of ice water and you sat there and screamed for about 2 hours until it went completely numb.
And then
I'm a proponent.
Go back on the field because you felt nothing.
Yeah, wrap it up and go play, but
there's something, the immersion, there's something, I think some compression, I feel like because of the nerve endings, it does provide some feeling of support and stability. But as a rule, I don't know, Danny, maybe you disagree with me. What do you think on compression and ice in general?
So I've never used ice as any sort of healing mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
It's more
it's a pain thing, typically, isn't it?
Thing is what I've used it for.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of similar to ibuprofen, take this, but then we need to actually fix the issue.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, I do run into a lot of people who will just sort of ice in perpetuity.
Right.
To
yes.
get better I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
3 weeks in, I'm still icing it.
Yeah. And then they're like, I'm not getting better. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I explain to them my point of view on it, and usually they will take it because they're not getting better. But as far as, that's not what we learned in school at all.
It's not one of the modalities that you use typically.
That's not at all what we learned in school either.
That being said, OSHA still considers hot and cold therapy to be first aid rather than a recordable modality. So,
but Liz was right. The contrast, there's a lot of research that shows the contrast helps.
The value of that.
I think too, it gives them something to do. People want a little bit of empowerment. So, ice and contrast heat is easy. I mean, we also, and I know Danny does this too. We talk about protective positions, neutral, don't, for the low back, no slouching, just try to stay neutral, engage a little bit. And that's all the stuff we would tell them anyways. Thank you for sitting up there.
I was gonna say, man, I know you directed that at me.
We discussed this last time.
Yeah, she does this to me all the time too.
Well, you cannot sit up straight here.
I'm a sloucher. I'm a habitual sloucher.
Oh, that's for I don't know if you want to talk about back supports, but
sure. I love it. Yeah, let's talk about them.
Oh my God. I don't know. If I just came up with a gimmick like that, I could have sold, my millions of units and then be on my island in the Caribbean.
Somebody is.
It's such a, it doesn't provide really, it does. I mean, unless you're a power lifter, in the Olympics, and they're using it for the compression, abdominal contraction there. But yeah, those are other things that people just rely on. They over rely, and they just don't. And then they still have back pain because they're never using their core or just using techniques to protect their back that they already have built in. You already have back support built in your body. You just need to, use it.
If we're talking about the back support, so being licensed therapists, we have to be responsible and say, I always tell people this because you'll run into people who've been using them for decades, like in warehouses, and don't just stop using them though. Don't do that.
Just don't quit.
Don't have, if you're a safety person, don't take it away from your employees all of a sudden like that, because they will get a back injury if you do that, because they're so deconditioned. That sort of built-in support that Liz was talking about, which is, your back extensors and all of those support muscles.
Yeah.
They have none of it essentially at that point because they've been relying on outside support. So if you wanted to take them away from your employees, you need to kind of,
you got to wean them slowly.
That's interesting. But I can remember, you guys probably neither of you were born yet, but I was, when the back brace came onto the scene and everybody wanted them, and people wanted OSHA to require them. They wanted it to be a regulation, back support, and we were all, this is a horrible idea. And everyone had them for a period of time, and it's good. I don't see them very often anymore.
Yeah.
When I go out into the community, into the different workplaces that I visit, I don't see them as often. And I know for the reasons you just discussed, we were never really supportive of them. I do know that, as you mentioned, which is always very astute, that trained lifters use a belt differently than someone would use a belt in an occupational setting.
Right.
They use the belt.
Yeah.
The workers that throw one on just think now that brace is now giving them some type of exoskeletal structure that they didn't have before. They can pick things up and do things they couldn't. Right. That's a great topic. I love those topics. Those are fantastic. What kind of workplaces have you had experience in? What kind of things have you been doing?
Well, it's funny because Danni and I are the region, like she's in poultry plants. I don't know where a poultry plant is around here. I mean, we have some farms, but I don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have them all out here, I think.
But oh my gosh, we don't have. I'm micro technology in just like manufacturing, electronics, things like that. A lot of micro, and also paper is another industry I've been involved in, from recycling to paperboard construction. That's, what I love about these industries. Like there's all this like language that they use internally. It's like a different, like hay out and make ready and, all these terminologies that you're learning when you go in, and you got to learn to talk their language. So
exactly.
And then sometimes like the tooling is one thing, but definitely when they talk about, we had a big hay out today, or it went broke. Like it fascinates me. I love that.
And you do have to learn a completely different vernacular, and each industry has its own language.
And each company.
And each company within an industry has its own language. It's really fascinating, and that's one of the things I love about it too. But I have a company that I work with regularly, and they have equipment called like convoluters and roll compressors and loopers and all of these things. And the first time I went in there, I was like, I've never heard of any of this stuff before, but so it's always interesting. It's always educational. I really do enjoy that aspect.
Like, I think in the beginning, when I'm first working with the company in the beginning, that's one of the things I'm really trying to learn is the work processes, what they're called, what, all those little things before I get, obviously I'm talking to people about themselves too, but I like to, maybe that's just part of like why we're in this niche, we kind of just dive into the details and the steps of what people do and just learning. But, it makes your brain sometimes go, bleh! And then you go to a different site, completely different industry, different set of problems and verbiage. And so then you got to switch gears. So I'm finding that.
Well, you're going to have to train them your vernacular as well. At some point when you're doing the educational piece, you probably speak a language that they/we don't understand quite as well. So there is a communication issue there as well. So
yeah, I try not to use too many clinical words. I really try to keep it very like simplified in terms so people can understand. I don't want to come off as some nerd in terms of like the body. Like I don't say your extensor carpi radialis, your multifidi need to be straight.
good, thank you.
Well, you have to say it so that people understand, and that's just like healthcare across the board. So
yeah,
like
unless we're
I don't
working
really
with engineers, okay? Engineers drive me crazy. All right, I'm sorry. I have engineers in my family. I can say this.
Yes,
okay.
you can.
So, like, for instance, I really never use the terms like flexion and extension, which are very specific terms in the body, because everyone generally thinks that if something is bent, it's flexed, and that's not true. So it's very confusing to people. So you might say, like, if you're teaching a stretch, like, bend your wrist so your fingers are pointing up. Like, I would never if I was teaching a group of people to stretch, I would never call this wrist extension, because it wouldn't make any sense to them. And they wouldn't carry it over long term. And they probably would disengage pretty quickly, too, during the training, because they wouldn't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So bend it up, bend it down.
And then, just for my own edification, abduction and adduction, I get them wrong all the time. Which is which?
Yeah.
Add is adding to the body.
Okay, so out is add and in is ab. If I was like referring to my legs.
Outward is abduction.
What's that?
Inward is adduction.
Yep.
Okay, so in is add.
Add. You're adding to your body.
Okay, and ab is out.
Yeah. Oh, see? I said it and I didn't say it clearly, so you didn't understand. So you're adding your arm to your body. And you're adding your leg to your body.
Okay.
So like your trunk.
Perfect.
That's how I learned it when I was in grad school.
Okay.
You're adding it.
Okay, perfect. I love it. Thank you. Because I've been using those terms for 40 years, and I probably get them right about every other time, which is.
And usually, like if you're looking at actual medical documentation, it will have like A, D, D in all caps, and then the rest in lowercase, because they just get confused a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so across the board.
So tell me, other things that you might do for your customers, your clients, the ergonomic assessment, the coaching and training. Are you a proponent of pre-shift stretching type things, or what kind of things do you recommend for them?
It depends on the job and the population. I think though, if you did a pre-shift warm up, that may look differently than what I recommend they do in terms of like recovery movements, even like how they do them and how many, obviously. I also think about stretch programs in terms of what are the job demands? What do they need to do that job? Do they need full arm overhead movement, or do they need full like squatting down to the ground, knee, hip, ankle motion, because they work really low? And so maybe that program needs to be modeled so that they can maintain those motions in those joints and those muscles. So I'll do something like that. I know, in terms of like static versus like how much, I don't do a lot of like static holding. I do more like joint motion to end range, then bring it back, just to kind of, get that joint ready for work in terms of like a pre-work warm up. So stretch groups, those are so tough because, you get people who, if you have the group too big, then you have this sometimes, or too small, you get a group think and nobody wants to do anything in front of somebody else because, these grown people are shy or, they're too cool. So you got to overcome that obstacle, and where they could do it. Do they have the space and things like that? But, overall, I think it is something useful to have just another layer to add, as well as the training. I usually I like to do like material handling training versus just lifting, because, you know, a lot of the concepts you do for lifting, you're going to use for carry, push, pull as well, in terms of, you know, engaging, looking up, you know, your back position, things like that, keeping things in close. So that's another piece, like the material handling training, office workers. You can't ignore our office workers. Although, you know, a lot of them, if you give one person a lumbar support, oh my God, everybody wants one, whether they need it or not.
Right. Of course.
You got to be careful with that. The chairs too. I got to be careful with, depending on what the company policy is. I try to stay within their policy, and I never promise a chair to anybody. I
never promise anything, any equipment to anybody.
No, never. Well, I mean, there's companies I go to on a regular basis, so I'm part of their ongoing ergonomic assessment. So when their new people come in, the first thing I say is, we're going to work with the chair you have. We have to follow the company policy. I can't say if this chair isn't perfect that we're going to be able to get you a new one. So,
right.
You know,
of course, I nearly lost my job with OSHA over a chair.
Really?
So I wanted a chair, and then I started, you know, and then I had a buddy that was a doctor who wrote me a note. Yeah, Fletch needs a chair. And I brought that in, and my boss was furious that I think the guy might have been a urologist or something. I don't know exactly what he was, but, you know, but yeah, promising the chair is always kind of a problem. I do think it's interesting, again, the groupthink mentality, particularly in the office settings, that they see one person receiving some type of a special, I don't want to say accommodation necessarily.
Accessory.
That's probably,
yeah.
But all of a sudden now I have that problem, or there is a lot of that, it seems. I don't deal with office safety personally.
There's a few different ways that you can approach that. The employer should have some sort of policy in place for like what they provide and when and why. And otherwise, it generally is approached as an accommodation. That's probably the most common thing that I see. There are some employers who just, you know, want to upgrade their equipment, and so they want recommendations for a great chair and a great desk. What I see more often is it being used as a reasonable accommodation. So
interesting. Yeah.
What about
definitely.
you, Liz?
I mean, I think I could get away with a lot of just, you know, adding in a monitorizer, sometimes just that little small stuff, even a new mouse pad, you know, it doesn't have to be high ticket items. I think people just really like the individualized attention and for their specific need. You know, you can kind of get a feel. And Danni, I think too, being healthcare professionals, like you kind of get a feel for somebody, like if they're just fine with how they set up, they just want to know the basics. And then you get that person that just maybe feels like, you know, who knows what's going on with them and the employer. So I try to just make sure like they understand I'm listening to their need and responding. And there are those that say, I insist on having a lumbar support, or I want to have a new keyboard. And that can be a little challenging, but you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be big ticket items like chairs and desks. It can be small ticket, you know, vertical mouse, you know, and most companies can have some sort of budget with that.
Yeah.
I try to work that out beforehand, obviously. You know, what are you willing, like Danni's saying, what are you willing to provide to your employees? And you know, and many people too want to just bring something in on their own. They just want to know what it is they need. So
yeah, I think that sort of is a big reason why the employers need to have some sort of policy, because with everything that we do, we aren't the decision makers. We make recommendations. We use our knowledge to make recommendations that will be in the best interest of that employee, but we're not going to buy or not buy equipment for an employee. That's the employer's decision.
Yeah.
So I drive a Subaru, and every 2 hours
we drive the same Subaru.
We have the same car. We share a car, actually. So every 2 hours, the Subaru tells me that I've been sitting for 2 hours. You know, the little screen pops up. The car has been running for 2 hours, which I used to find an annoyance, although it just pops up momentarily, just very briefly, you know. But just the reminder that you've been stationary for 2 hours and maybe it's time to pull over and take a break. We had that when I was with the government. We also there was a period of time in the federal government where they were very focused on office ergonomics. And so they would actually freeze our computers on an interval. So your computer would basically freeze up, forcing you to get up and do some, move around, get a cup, whatever that was, use the restroom, whatever. It compelled you to do that. Inevitably, it was when I had a deadline and I had to get something out in 10 minutes, and then I would freeze up.
That software still exists.
Does it?
Yeah.
I was so I used to that used to drive me crazy because I was always on a tight timeline. But I think do those things, is that beneficial? I mean, is that useful for people to take periodic breaks throughout the day? Maybe this isn't something that you even recommend or discuss, but
like the sitting is a new smoking, that whole thing.
Yeah.
We just move less as a society now. I think people have to realize, though, that yes, they do need to move more. But it doesn't need to be these drastic get up and walk to the, Chris, if people are working at home, you can get up and go to the laundry room or you go to the water, wherever, depending where you are. But just moving in your own chair and changing positions is good, because that allows some micro break and recovery, so forth. The sit stand, what I kind of dislike about that whole concept is people will say, I stood all day. You're like, well, that's still stationary. Mm-hmm. You're really supposed to, go back and forth.
There's a lot of misunderstanding about the standing desks.
Yeah,
sure.
That's an interesting concept, that whole stand thing.
Yeah, you really need to go. But the thing is, people don't want to do that because then they have to stop what they're doing and, stand up and change everything. So it kind of interrupts their workflow a little bit. Mm-hmm. I find that most people end up just sitting, or most of the time they don't use it as much in a standing position. I think really that's where kind of the wellness part comes into play, getting people to just do walking out, exercising on a regular basis on their own, the overall health of somebody. I don't know, Danny, I have many thoughts on it, but they're all over the place, my thoughts. We need you to come to CDS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, getting up and moving when you're like a computer worker, that's what we refer to as micro breaks. You've probably heard of that. I usually try to combine it when I'm talking to someone so the recommendation is every 20 to 30 minutes, but that's not realistic for most people. It's just not. So I usually tell them to shoot for at least once an hour. Okay. If they sit, get up and move, you can use that opportunity to go get more water. And then you're combining hydration with movement. So 2 good things. And then I might show them a couple of easy stretches that they can do that are good for an office worker. And then you were talking about sitting for an extended period of time while driving. I never thought of that flash as being you've been sitting for 2 hours, but yeah, usually if I'm on the road for a long time, because you and I drive a lot, I don't drive as much as you, but I usually try to stop every hour and a half if I can, just to move. But 2 hours, really, you probably should pull over and walk somehow, move, do a couple stretches. And then with folks who stand, so factory work, that maybe you're sitting at a machine and you really don't move, walk or anything. I usually, I always assess if it's safe for them, but I might coach them to do heel raises or marching in place. Or if possible, you can have the employer set up a bar or small steps, as long as it's not going to be a tripping hazard in front of them, so they can put one foot up and they can weight shift throughout the day. So the big takeaway with that sort of stuff is just move. Just keep moving. Because eventually if you don't move, you won't be able to when you want to. So just keep moving.
Yeah. And posture. You can sit still, but if you're hunched over, that's how you're gonna leave that you're never gonna get out of that at some point. Right. Your body's gonna go, oh, we don't know how to sit up straight anymore.
Right.
Even doing little posture checks. I call them posture checks too. Like just do a posture check, it doesn't have to be a whole movement, but just get out of that habit.
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely standing workers, like their feet and their knees, you think about the knee joint when you're in a extended position, that's actually a end range position, even if they're not quite in that locked, but the compression is constant on the cartilage, and you want movement. That's how your joints get their nutrition, is through movement and the compression. But you got to unload them, bend the knees, weight shift a little bit. So that's usually a tip I talk about.
The educational piece is huge, obviously, and probably a lot of what is most beneficial, just the awareness of the importance of doing these things. And I'm not sure that information has been communicated in most of the facilities that I go to. But if nothing else, everybody should avail themselves of your services, to at least for that piece. If they're not interested in the assessment, just the educational piece to, how to keep your body and your mind sharp throughout the day, and not to start developing these long-range chronic issues that trouble so many of us.
I think people respond to, if you teach, the approach is like, this is what you need to do. But a lot of people, if you give them the education of why something is good for them, and that's just a better step for them in terms of self-awareness, to say, well, this is why this is good for me to do. It's not because they're telling me I have to do it. And then they make that decision when you show them how and what they should do, then they take it upon themselves to go to that next step. And I think a lot of canned programs are like, this is what you should lift for. This is how you lift. But they don't go into why. What's happening in your spine? Like, I get into my presentations, I get into the disc, what's happening in the disc. And again, I'm keeping it very layman friendly. I'm not getting, I'm not talking about, the nucleus pulposus and too much. I'm just going to say the gel middle, but I get into the mechanics of the body. Nobody is exposed to that, and then when they understand, like, this is what I'm doing to my body, then they can take that maybe into more behavioral change. And I think that's where, that's what, if Danni and I were in the clinic treating, that's a lot of what we would tell people when we're treating them about, like, this is why this is good for you. So we're just taking that into the industrial world and applying it to what they do in industry. And I find that people respond to that. They come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh, you know what? Now I understand. And so and then that opens the dialogue and the conversation to maybe, what their concern is, or if they want to show me something that they're doing and they realize might be bothering me, and that opens like an ergo issue. So it is a great, that's what makes it exciting for me when I have those type of interactions.
Well, in those sorts of canned programs, like what you said, particularly with lifting, I find that just sort of the generic programs that exist, people just tune them out, and like the OSHA generic trainings.
Absolutely.
But the reason why is, my perspective on it is because they're not real life. Like, rarely are you lifting someone in something in an industrial environment where, like, you approach it directly head on, you have plenty of space to move around, and you have a great coupling, a posture, and you can lift it up, and you have plenty of space to turn and take it over to where, like, that just doesn't happen.
Right.
So it's not really, the real life conditions really just aren't addressed, and so people don't feel like it's actually helpful.
Of course.
But I find when you actually address the real life aspects of it, like, you don't have anywhere to put one of your feet. Let's figure out where we can put your other foot so that it's still safe and you can still be sturdy on your feet while you're lifting this 50-pound box. Then they'll usually listen. That
is such a great point, because I know in the past I have whipped out that lifting diagram that shows the individual squatting down perfectly around the box that fits perfectly into their space, and they carry it perfectly. I've got 2 hours to do this apparently because, everything is perfect, and everybody just like, oh, geez, you haven't been out in our plant, have you? Because it's never like that.
Yep.
Which is I think people appreciate that many of these things are just somewhat fantasy. That's just not how it works out in our facility. So
well, and the person demonstrating it is always like a tall male. At least that's what I've seen. And I work with a lot of small females who are still having to lift these like huge things, and they can't even get their arms around it. So you have to figure out how they can safely grab it to lift it. Yeah. And then also all of that weight, which is counterbalancing them, and they're small. So how can they actually do it safely?
Just go get the guy. Dude, carry this for me.
I'm sure that never happened to you.
That was my experience. Well, I was a nurse's aide in a nursing home for a summer, so I spent a lot of time carrying people, We didn't have a Hoyer lift, so I was the lift.
Wow.
Which was interesting.
You were the lift team.
I was the lift team. Yeah, exactly. 2-person lift or Fletch, one or the other. Whatever. Well, so your business specifically, Impact Ergonomics, and you are located in the Syracuse area. Do you travel all over the state? Where do you go to provide your services?
It's funny. I have some therapists that work for me that implement the injury prevention program. And I have done that beyond the state lines. Because what I do is it's a model I use. I have a database, web-based, so that we can document and for our reporting. So I can implement programs anywhere in the country except in Nebraska and Iowa and anywhere where Danni is. That's sort of like, first of all, that whole region, I don't even want to go there. She is so like, it's like a different world where you guys are.
It is.
Agriculture, but we always have jobs.
But I have but I also travel myself. Yes. For ergonomic assessments, mostly short-term type of projects. Like North Carolina and Pennsylvania and things, that are Kansas. I've been to Kansas, which is lovely until the storm came in, and then my plane got delayed, and it was kind of, people were saying tornado. I don't know. I was like, oh my gosh. That was with a company that was here in my area, and this is like their sister site.
Of course.
That I had to do some work and training. So predominantly that kind of stuff I can travel. So, and
nice.
However, I do have a blackout area.
Yeah. No, we all do that. It's just professional courtesy oftentimes.
Absolutely.
And we're truthfully, we're just kind of a small network of people that we all interact. And one of the, like I said, getting to know you and know Danni and know people that have these specialties is such a benefit to me, because I can appear very smart and in control when I see a need that I can't fulfill, but I can refer someone who I know can do that for them. That is really a tremendous benefit.
There's so much need for this sort of work anyways.
Oh, absolutely. Every company should be utilizing one of the two of your services, and nobody else, but just one of the two of you.
Absolutely.
I truly think that, I really look at what we do as preventative healthcare, and I don't think that insurance-based healthcare does anything with prevention. And I think just with the cost of healthcare completely out of control and our outcomes are terrible, there's really no choice but to start moving to more preventative options. And we've sort of found this niche where, since employers have to pay for injuries, they want to prevent them. They have a financial incentive to prevent them. And I think things like this will continue to grow in the future.
I cannot
and we have
imagine
great outcomes.
Yes, and you do have great outcomes. Right. I rarely have good outcomes. You guys have great outcomes. I totally agree. And like I said, everywhere that I've seen this implemented, it is successful. The employers are grateful. They realize it's something they should have done long ago. So
it's definitely catching on more and more. It's almost like becoming like every company now wants to have this type of program or support. There are some competitors, if you want to say, that do like the soft tissue work. I won't say names, but it's like one piece of like many, it's really not enough. It's very reactive. But companies may buy into that, and then they realize, oh, this isn't really helping us. I just encountered that recently, but I don't want to go into negative mode. But anyways, yes, I do think it's growing, and I can't wait to run into that person 10 years ago that was like, oh, so you're in wellness. It's not going to be a long term. You might be the first thing.
I totally agree.
Liz, I just sort of look at that as like, it's just that company's culture is either going to fit the way I practice or it's not. I'm very specific. Like, I'm very holistic. We want to figure out where these injuries are coming from. We're not just going to do massage. But there's other companies where they just want, like, they literally just want that. So I'm not going to be their vendor, and that's right, because it's just not going to fit.
You are so good like that. This is why I love Danni. She's just like, you know what? I don't need you.
Yeah.
You have your rabbit hole, and when you want to come out of that rabbit hole, I'll be here.
Right, but it's not a good fit, and
it's not a good fit, and no one will be happy. It'll be very frustrating for everyone.
And why would we want to do that? Let's go where people want us and appreciate what we can do, and they're willing to, go on that ride with us, and reap the benefits. I'm totally into that. That's the most liberating day of your life, is when you tell somebody, no, I don't think I want to work with you.
Right.
That was the best day of my professional life. So. Well, so how do people get in touch with you if they want to know more about your company, or get in touch with you
Well, my website does have a little, email, impactergonomics.com. There is a contact page. They're free to fill that out. That comes directly to me. Liz at impactergonomics.com. I know it's a long email. Sorry.
It's not so bad.
That's my email. That's probably the website. I'm on LinkedIn as Liz Kiggins.
Are we connected? Are we linked?
Are we linked?
We'll have to be sure and do that afterwards if we have not.
Yeah,
you can find her through me.
Okay, I can find her through Danni. So, because this episode will be pushed out through LinkedIn, if not this afternoon, this weekend. So everyone will have an opportunity on LinkedIn to see it that I'm connected with, and then Danni pushes it out through her network, and so others will push it out through their network. So probably by Sunday you'll have reached probably 250,000 people.
Oh my God.
I would guess, or maybe 10,000, something like that. I don't know. Maybe I exaggerate slightly for sponsorship endorsements. But no, I know it's very exciting, and I love what you guys do. Little known fact, when I was, I'd gotten out of graduate school and I was working, was employed by the Department of Defense. I wasn't particularly thrilled initially with that position, and so I applied to PT school, chiropractic school, another of other schools, and at one time, almost for like a full week, I wanted to be a PT. So we're practically
you're almost there.
We're practically kin in some respects. I've been to a number of PTs, OTs, mental health specialists. You could pretty much
sell yourself as a therapist.
Yeah, sure.
Exactly. Just start charging.
Exactly.
Sometimes we're mental therapists. I just want to put that in as a side note, too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think if I was going to recommend to a young, aspiring safety and health professional what courses of study they would take, some type of counseling or mental health would be a part of that.
Yeah.
The technical stuff, yes, but there is a lot of interpersonal challenge that goes along with the job. So
this is not like a laboratory healthcare setting.
It's definitely not. Right. Yeah. Oh, I've really enjoyed getting to meet you and speak with you. This is really exciting. I am thrilled that you're out there doing this. I'm a true believer. I don't know. I mean, I seem like a dork, but I am a true believer in what we do. This is really important stuff. I love what you guys are doing. Any way that we can help you, I mean, that may be limited to some degree with you in Syracuse, but thank you for coming on and speaking with us, introducing your company.
It's great just to talk about it.
It is.
Other people, like I said, we're like, oh my God, that's why I'm like, Danni, you're never going away. We are always going to stay in touch.
This is fantastic. So we're going to send this information out. We will put your contact information into the notes with the episode when it gets pushed out on LinkedIn. And then it'll go onto my website with your contact information so people can find it on LinkedIn, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcast, or at FletcherSafety.com. It'll all be up there. So if you are in a state other than Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, all right, call Liz. If you're in if you're in Region 7, call Danny. But everybody needs to be doing this, in my opinion. Every company that I have ever worked with would benefit from the services that you guys offer. So thank you for being out there doing it. And
thank you for supporting us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for being a great supporter, Doug.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. I don't know if you're a Syracuse fan or who you root for.
Well, you have to root for Syracuse.
Is that kind of an expectation? So just as a side note for people that are still listening, that game like a week ago between Purdue and Syracuse was incredible. Did you happen to see that?
I did not.
What?
I did not. I missed it.
So
I was probably working.
Yeah, you were. Of course you were. It was 9-3 at halftime, and there were, I think, 44 points scored in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
So
it's reviving the excitement.
Yes.
The traffic was horrendous.
I think Syracuse is 3-0 or something.
Yeah.
They're like vying for a national championship.
About time.
For another week. But all right, Liz. Thank you very much. Danny, thanks for being here. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.